questions is useful. Simply, I mean, the whole idea of it is to hear people's voice, to get a sense of who's on the call, because just looking at names, you don't necessarily know that. But obviously, it does take a bit of time. If anyone wants to provide feedback on that in the chat box, that would be useful. Okay, so I'm just going to share with you a quick backstory in terms of where we're at with this question. From a meta point of view, obviously, collectively, we've been working on sustainable supply chains, reducing deforestation, land use conversion for 15 plus years, in some cases more than that. But still, deforestation, land use conversion continues. And there's a growing consensus of a need to work more collaboratively and systemically in production companies, in production countries, hence a sort of proliferation of multi-stakeholder initiatives, whether national, subnational, landscape level, and the sort of successful engagement with the private sector in these processes is essential, but sometimes it can be difficult and sometimes it can be limited, not in all cases. One thing that we're hearing from the private sector is an ask for clearer guidance on why and how to engage. And to Caroline Peterson's question, yeah, the focus here is very much on what are we asking the private sector for? You know, what inputs are we looking, what actions we're expecting? And that's what they're asking back is yes, you know, we're interested in engaging, but please be a little bit clearer in terms of how to engage, when to engage, what to engage around, what sort of actions do you expect. So we are working on developing some private sector, some guidelines for private sector engagement, both global guidelines and at the national level and subnational where we work there. We are in discussions with various others who are doing similar work at the moment. We may or may not bring those different streams together. At the very least, we are continuing to sort of share perspectives and hopefully cross-fertilize ideas. There may be a benefit in bringing some of this work together, but that remains to be seen. I love this quote from the head of sustainability from a large global food manufacturing company. When I said what would be a useful output from this process, and he said 3 PowerPoint slides. So that's, I mean, it's slightly said in jest, but it's basically the approach that we're taking. We're trying to be rigorous in the work that we're doing, but there is actually a lot of intelligence out there, whether it's in reports or in people's heads. Our perspective is that a lot of the work that needs to be done is to synthesize that and to make it as clear and simple as possible. Here are some of the reports that I've been reading of late, and this is just a very small sample, but there's tons of incredibly thoughtful, insightful, useful research that's out there. But much of it is in 80-page reports or 250-page books. And the reality is that even the sustainability people in companies don't have the time to read most of these reports. And certainly people sitting in, you know, procurement or production or operations in production countries do not have time to read this. So I think from where this is, I'm putting us, caption competition, yes, I'm putting us more on the side of the dummies, guide for dummies, so private sector engagement in national and subnational platforms for dummies, rather than the definitive word on how to engage. I also think this is an emerging field, so I don't think it makes sense to attempt to be definitive because we're learning as we go. So the guidelines that we're working on at the moment, we're working on global guidelines. We have been working at the country level as well, but through doing that, I established that it would be useful at least to create a common framework that our countries could then follow. So we're leading with the global guidelines, and over the next 3 months, we're going to be developing our draft, so version 0.1 draft of some guidelines. We will be hopefully ready with in April for then further consultations through April to June, and publication of a sort of version 1 in July that then will take out into workshops, discussions, and then evolve it. At the country level, we've already been working on some guidelines in a couple of our countries, and we will follow a similar process. And of course, these things will feed into each other. So the global guidance is drawn from our country level experience, and ultimately, as we try to apply it to the country level, we'll learn, and that will iterate through to the back to the global guidance. And obviously, coming out of the back end of then trying to work with it, we will see subsequent versions. So I just wanted to sort of take a reading from the gathered group here. It's a good group. You will have a lot of experience of working on these issues. So we're going to do a live poll in a second. So I just want you to think about a multi-stakeholder commodity initiative, or it could be a multi-commodity initiative. Particularly we're looking here at the jurisdictional work, but if you're working on a landscape level project, that is also relevant. So thinking it whether it's national or subnational. So it's probably best to pick one or create your average across the portfolio. And just think from the point of view of producers, we've later on we'll split out these buckets. Producers and buyers is obviously a very rudimentary way of categorizing the private sector, but we're going to use it for this particular poll. Just think about the current quality of private sector engagement in the initiative or the portfolio of initiatives you're responsible for, and think about whether for producers is the quality of engagement excellent, is it good, is it adequate, or is it poor? So pick one of those. And then for buyers, if you think about the sort of engagement you would like to be seeing from buyers, whether that's traders, manufacturers, or even retailers, what's the level of engagement that you're seeing there? So don't worry about this. This is obviously a relatively unscientific test, but it's just a way to get a sense. I'm going to give you a minute or so just to pick one for each of these, and then we'll have a discussion, see what we've got.
Charlie, you're muted.
Does anybody need any more time? Or have you done? Okay, Matthias, could you share the results? Okay, does anybody want to share a perspective on this in terms of your experience? I mean, it's interesting, the buyers are a bit worse than the producers, but the distribution is quite similar, a bit stronger on the producers. Would have thought it would be even more stronger on the producers. But who's got a point of view on what you're seeing here? Anyone want to share an experience of what they consider to be at the bottom end here, where engagement has been difficult?
I can make some initial comments, Charlie.
Sure, go ahead.
This is Marlon. Looking at what we have seen so far and what was this small poll, not sure what is trying to get out of it, but when I look at what you just showed, several questions pop up, and one is obviously there's a lack of guidance, but is that the only or the major problem that the private sector is facing? When we consider producers on one side and consumers at the very other end, and you have all the stakeholders of the value chain in between and connected. So, okay, we're gonna get guidance, more guidance. Definitely it's better to have guidance than operate without guidance. There's no question about it. But what happens after the guidance? How are these guidances connected to the actual, for example, the Peru National Coffee Action Plan? And that's why when I was looking at the poll, I was very hesitative about how to respond to it, because it all depends on which commodity we're talking about. So whether it's coffee, whether it's palm, whether it's cocoa, or fish in the fishery sector, or soy, it all varies. And lastly, who is the guidance for? It's just for buyers, for the private sector. How do we affect consumers who are the end users of a green commodity? And when we look at all that, then that's why you see like a big range from poor to, I don't think there was much on the excellent level, but if we don't, if we need to look at who are we addressing, where is that our point of intervention is, so to change the dynamics. But this is just a general comment after seeing the slides and looking at the poll. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, we're going to, on the next slide, get more into, in fact, we're going to have a breakout discussion on exactly what the obstacles to engagement are. So we'll be able to get into more discussion on that. Anybody else want to share a point of view or perspective? Here we're just
Charlie.
taking, yeah, who's that?
Yeah, this is Lloyd Gamble with WWF. Yeah, I had similar observations, I think, to the previous speaker, right? Talking about engagement as a sort of broad encompassing term, it's a little bit difficult to answer the question. And our experience has been that these sort of jurisdiction level, landscape level initiatives are so diverse, right? It's hard to come up with sort of formulaic guidance for any particular crop or region. So just important to have a sensitivity to that diversity, of course. Thanks.
Yeah, and we're going to get into splitting this out in more detail in a minute. So this is really just intended as like a sort of taking the temperature in a very generic way in terms of how adequate or otherwise is current levels of engagement. But maybe we should move on to the next slide. So as I was preparing for this webinar earlier this week, I was seeking inspiration. And this is actually a photograph from the wall of the office in which I'm in the UK. And it's a quote from Bill Gates. Your most unhappy customers, your greatest source of learning. And it got me thinking about the value of inquiring into all the reasons why people don't engage. So from our experience of national, subnational platforms where engagement has been difficult to mobilize from different parts of the value chain, from different types of organization, from companies coming from different points of view, and thinking really about where engagement has been difficult. If we look at it from the perspective of the companies, what is it that is the obstacle? So we're going to go into some breakout groups, and then we're going to have a poll on this. So again, some of you, cut across multiple different platforms, so maybe that makes this a little more complicated to you, except at least you have the opportunity to kind of compare and contrast between situations where you've seen good, strong engagement and situations where it's been weak. And I've suggested a few potential reasons for why engagement may be difficult. And no doubt there are plenty of other reasons. But the invitation is you're going to be broken into groups of 4 or 5. You're going to have 10 minutes to discuss this topic, thinking about the obstacles to engagement. Because if we're going to create guidance, then clearly being aware of the obstacles is an important part of figuring out what's going to be useful from a guidance perspective. Clearly, guidance is not the only thing that's going to improve engagement. There may be other more fundamental issues. There may be process design issues, political context issues, etc. Here, obviously, we're thinking about to what extent can guidance help increase engagement. But you will not have this on your screen when you go into your breakout groups, because you're going to be seeing each other when you go into breakout groups. So you might want to do a screen grab or just make a note, and I'm just going to run through them. So potential obstacles to engagement may be from lack of awareness. So simply companies either not being aware that the initiative even exists, which happens, in our national commodity platforms, or not aware of how to engage with it. It could be a capacity constraint, where companies, particularly smaller companies, but larger ones as well, do feel they do not have the capacity to engage in a lengthy, uncertain, multi-stakeholder process. The clarity issue is they may feel that the process is too generic. They're not sufficiently clear on what exactly they are being asked to do, and exactly their participation may not feel sufficiently focused. Just the question of value, they may understand all of the above, but actually decide that there isn't a good return on investment for them in terms of their investment of time, effort, commitments, etc., and decide not to participate for that reason. It could be a confidence issue, that they do not have confidence that the initiative is actually going to be useful and see results, so they may lack confidence in the process or in the government. And finally, lack of alignment. So they may understand all of the above, but actually decide that their interests do not lie in supporting this initiative. So the invitation in the discussion is you'll be in groups of 4 or 5. You're going to have 10 minutes each group, and just to share different perspectives, thinking about the obstacles to engagement. What in your experience are the obstacles? It could be these, it could be others. We're going to have a vote, a polling vote on these. You'll be able to pick 3 from these when you come back, and then we will have a plenary discussion. So Matthias, if you could break everybody into groups, that would be great.
Yeah, Charlie, just one thing. There are a few questions on the chat box that I think you should address before going to the breakout rooms.
Does anybody have a pressing, I'm looking at these, I mean, we can address all these, but some of these we'll probably have time to address later. Does anybody have a pressing question now, or can you hold it until after the breakout groups?
Sorry, this is Jane. Yeah, my only question is about the target audience for the guidance to guide our discussions in the breakout groups as well. What type of companies are we talking about?
So yeah, I'll go into that later. But obviously, it's the answer to your question is what sort of companies do we think should be engaged in these initiatives, and are they showing up or not? So clearly, producers are absolutely essential. The closer you are to to production, the more essential it is. But obviously, there's also the question of the support of the market and the buyers. So I leave that to your discretion. It's also on a case-by-case basis. Any other questions? Okay, Matthias, you ready to go?
Yep. So I'm creating the groups right now. Bear with me 1 second. Jairo, ¿nos escuchas?
Ahora sí.
¿Cómo estás, Jairo? ¿Estás tranquilo?
Bien, bien. Claro que sí.
Mira, estamos en salas, en breakout rooms. Estamos discutiendo un par de cosas. ¿Tú acabas de llegar?
Sí, de hecho, tenía problemas de conexión, Matías, así que hasta ahorita logré.
Ah, ok. Bueno, depende de ti. ¿Quieres que te meta en un grupo?
Y cuéntame brevemente qué se está haciendo y si es provechoso y no interrumpo, me interesaría.
La idea es discutir cuáles son los problemas que se encuentran al tratar con empresas privadas. En el chat te acabo de enviar los tipos de problemas, por ejemplo, awareness, capacity, clarity, value, confidence, y la idea es discutir cuál de estos motivos es el principal. En tu caso, por ejemplo, en Costa Rica, ¿qué hace difícil tratar con empresas privadas en base a
Ok.
estos?
Ya de
¿Sí?
hecho se me vinieron varias. Ey, vámonos al ruedo, si se puede hacer algo, genial.
Dale.
Vale, hombre.
Eh, te lleva uno, espérate.
Vale, te agradezco.
Ahí va, tienes que aceptarlo.
Vale, hombre.
Ajirevi, are you there? Hello. Hello, Ajirevi.
Hello.
Hello, can you hear us, Ajirevi?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, so people are in breakout rooms. They are coming back in a few minutes, okay?
No problem.
Good.
Okay, I'm assuming we're all back. Can you see my screen?
Nope.
Yeah, I can see it. I can see Matthias now.
Okay, somehow I've lost my controls.
There you are. There you are. There you are, Charlie.
Yeah, but we cannot see your screen.
Yeah, not your screen.
Okay.
It's okay to lose control, Charlie.
It's okay to lose control, did you say?
Yeah. Enjoy.
Yeah, once in a while. Oh, there you are.
So you give me permission to start sobbing and hit my head against the table. Okay, now you can see my screen, yeah?
Yes.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. I know this is a bit irritating to people to be forced to answer questions in buckets that are maybe a bit meaningless because as has been pointed out and as I'm about to go into, we need a much more nuanced view of the whole value chain, different stages of it, different types of organization, different players, different positions, different perspectives, and tailored messages for different audiences. But nevertheless, I'm still going to force you to do this exercise because we're looking here at kind of the averages. So you're about to see a poll that will ask you to select your top 3 reasons for lack of engagement across this set of 6, so awareness, capacity, clarity, value, confidence, and alignment. So just pick 3 from each list, 1 for producers and 1 for buyers. So what's the major obstacles to more effective engagement?
Matthias, if you're hearing, I cannot submit the poll. Maybe it already happened, but when I press the button, it doesn't do anything.
Okay, that's weird, Marlon. Sorry about that.
Okay, does anyone else need more time?
Same problem, cannot submit.
Can't get in? Okay, well, this isn't scientific. We won't be publishing a paper in Nature based on these results. Okay, so Matthias, do you want to share the results with us? Okay, I mean, just review them for yourselves. I'm not going to go into a detailed debate on these results because there's only a certain degree to which they're meaningful. But it'd be good to hear back from your breakout, well, any comments on this, but also to hear back any key insights or takeaways from your breakout groups.
I'll jump first if nobody else is doing it. I look at the results and something really strikes me is that risk is not considered one of the criteria. However, if you look at value, which was one of the highest rating criteria, it's actually very well connected with confidence and alignment. So when you're producing, the companies, when they engage in this process, whatever the first thing, and I've been part of the private sector too, and I am, think about risk. What are the risks that I'm taking by engaging in this process or in this new way of doing things? How does this affect my profits, my sales, my net revenue? And then understanding the risks, then I might find value, increase confidence, and I probably feel that this is where this is or is not aligned to what my company wants to do. But again, you know, all this leads me to look at how do I assess risk is mainly by, of course, that's not the only way, but mainly by looking at the market and see how much products I will be able to sell, and how these changes may possibly affect my consumer base. So I totally agree with the results of the poll, particularly the value part. I think the awareness, capacity, and clarity are very important. I think if one sector that has capacity is the private sector. So thank you.
Hi, Charlie.
Thanks, Mom. Yeah, go ahead.
I can add from our group discussion. Ibu Tri is there. This is Sinta and Margaret as well. So yeah, definitely we're talking about the lack of awareness and capacity. I don't think it's particularly only from the private sectors, but also based on some of our experience, also, you know, from other stakeholders, even the understanding on the, you know, common understanding on particular issue or the root cause of problems can be different from, you know, different stakeholders, and then how you can move on to planning action plan and, you know, move on with your agenda if you don't have that same understanding on what is the problem and how you're going to tackle it. So that's one. And we're also talking about the value of the alignment. You know, if there's not much alignment with the private sector in, you know, agenda, how this can be a value of them. But then also it's probably again related to that capacity and the lack of awareness that it's probably aligned, but different language and different understanding on one same issue. It's probably is the deep down is the main problem. We're also talking about maybe not on your list, but also different time frame, because you know, company often has shorter time frame with their KPI, maybe annually or maybe every 6 months. While, you know, when we're talking about landscape engagement, it's a long-term process, might take 3 to 5 years, and it's probably will be fine with the government, but you know, maybe private sector would like some, you know, a more shorter result, which this is also something that, you know, you have to work together. So either you develop a short and medium term to contribute the long-term collaboration. You know, that's obviously different. You know, different project will have different way to identify this. And then the last point that we also discuss is, I guess it's also for company the security that this collaboration not only to non-private sectors but also to another private sectors, to other company, that this also will develop a pre-competitive space for them to work on common issues, to, you know, to tackle on common issues. And, you know, in a way, it will give them value because it will reduce cost of implementation, reduce cost of monitoring. So yes, so we actually think all these points is actually can be quite related to each other. So yes, thanks.
Thank you. In the interest of time, what I would like to do is to give a minute of personal reflection and for you to share your reflections in the chat box. So if we think about obstacles, you know, anything that's coming up for you now, like as a key insight, key takeaway, key message, if you could spend a minute to reflect on what that might be, and then just share like a single thing in the chat box, then we'll be able to capture the kind of the collective intelligence of this group and harvest it after the webinar. When you share your insight or reflection, just make sure it goes to everybody so we can all see it. Is anybody typing, still processing a thought? Needing another minute? Okay, I'm going to move on. Thank you for those comments, extremely helpful. I'm aware of the constraints of trying to have a webinar that is interactive, gives the chance for people to discuss, has the opportunity to capture things via chat, and also to get through material. So I'm going to just quickly skip through a few of these slides. In terms of what we want the guidelines to address, all of these issues are relevant. I think there's an extent to which better guidance to companies, ultimately on a case-by-case, platform-by-platform, jurisdiction-by-jurisdiction basis, can do quite a lot to improve the clarity of the process, explain the business case more clearly, give a better understanding of why the process is designed how it is, what the timeframes are, what the expected inputs will be, what the expected outcomes will be, what the potential sort of menu of options for engagement can be. And overall, I think we need to get, from a GCP point of view, much more sophisticated in communicating those messages, but also thinking about the actual process design of the way we run our platforms, and how we can give more multiple ways of engaging. And this image moving beyond the one size fits all. So already people have been commenting on this, but perhaps sometimes we fall into the trap of talking about private sector engagement generically, when in fact the private sector is composed of multiple different parts. In terms of the audience for guidance, clearly you're looking across different stages of the value chain. You're looking at large and small. You're looking at supportive organizations. You're looking at those that are trying to be obstructive. And you've also got to think about different functional areas of the organization and messages that speak to those different groups. So yeah, this is challenging, and as we attempt to create guidance that addresses these multiple different audiences, we may find that we actually need to have multiple sets of guidance that are framed specifically for different audiences. Obviously, in terms of the stage of the value chain that is more or less important to engage with, engaging with the producers, the farmers, the sector on the ground in the country of production is absolutely essential. So this is a heat map in terms of priority. So priority over to the right, towards the top, obviously industry associations and larger companies have greater capacity to engage. And then in terms of international markets, different dynamics, again, an emphasis towards the right and to the top, but how do we also engage, over to the left and more to the bottom? What are the different modes of engagement? Do we need to innovate in terms of platform process? So at the moment, our platform processes run in a specific geographic location. Do we need to be running events, virtual events that engage with international markets? Do we need to be running events in other locations? Do we need to be engaging much more with industry associations and groups that can give access to some of the harder to reach parts of the market? And obviously also think more deeply about the multiple forms of engagement. So turning up to a multi-stakeholder workshop is one form of engagement, participating in the process, but it's not the only form of engagement. And one of the criticisms that I've heard from companies is that sometimes that form of engagement is not sufficiently specific. We're not necessarily convening specifically around the issues that are of most relevance to companies. Companies don't want to sit through things that they feel is not relevant. So just in terms of what the guidance will cover, clearly the ultimate goal here is to create platform-specific guidance, but we're going through the process of creating some generic high-level global guidance, which will attempt to get the business case for engagement in national, subnational platforms across to the kind of the global players more effectively. And we're really targeting not the sustainability leaders from the leading companies who already understand this stuff. We're targeting more their colleagues who may not grasp it, and also the laggards. And as I said at the beginning of this call, it is sort of a guide for dummies, sort of short, concise, usable, clear, addresses the key points, gets the key arguments across, and then cascading that down to the country level and customizing it at the country level and making it obviously much, much, much more specific to specific processes, specific platforms, specific national action plans that we're creating. And obviously that applies across other jurisdictional initiatives that people are running. So yeah, the guidance will provide some framing for those that are unfamiliar with it, the different levels at which work is occurring and why they're all relevant, and where the subnational national processes fit in. It will explain how a typical process works and what are the what's the ask of companies, what's the menu of options of engagement at the different stages in the process. What are the typical issue areas which a typical national, subnational process will cover, and the sub-issues within these, and what are the typical, or what are examples of actions that typically come out of a jurisdictional approach. And this is a matrix we created to think about those different levels across the top. So working from farm to landscape to subnational to national to global. So increasing from left to right, from local to regional to sectoral. And then the different types of action by companies, from uncoordinated individual actions on individual production areas, through individual supply chains, through to more coordinated and collective action, through to more collaborative action when you get into the area of partnerships and institution building. And our focus here is principally on putting the case for more engagement by key actors in subnational national processes, particularly around improved coordination and collaboration. Now, I feel we've only got 5 minutes to go. Generally, I hate talking. I feel I've done far too much talking, but we're nearly out of time. There's a huge amount of collective intelligence on this call. I'm going to ask you again to think of your one parting question. So Einstein, this is my favorite quote: "If I had an hour to solve a problem and my life depended on the solution, I would spend the first 55 minutes determining the proper question to ask. But once I know the proper question, I could solve the problem in less than 5 minutes." So before we close, and hopefully there'll be an opportunity to hear a couple of voices before we do, I would love for you to be thinking about what is the real question here. You know, what's the question that's coming up that needs to be answered? Question or questions? Is it really about guidance? Is it about customized guidance? Is it about fundamental flaws in methodologies? Are the objections actually valid? The reasons that people don't engage, is it about sorting out the process? Or otherwise just a key question for us, for our process, and a key ask and insight. I'm just going to have a sort of concluding remark. A few questions have come up earlier around, how are we interfacing with other initiatives, etc. At the moment, this particular set of slides was framed specifically around the work we're doing in our own platforms. We clearly need to both provide better guidance to the private sector and all its different guises in terms of how to engage with the work that we do. But we also need to innovate our process so that we have processes that are more conducive to effective engagement. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the call, there are multiple other players looking at similar and related issues, whether it's ProForest, WWF, the Accountability Framework. We're certainly drawing on all the different bits of work and research that have been done on this, multiple reports, IDH, etc. At the level of global guidance, there may be some collaboration, but ultimately I think we need to probably all be writing our own better guidance at the level of the individual initiatives that we're all responsible for running. Does anybody want to have a closing remark or comment?
Charlie, it's Pascal. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you very much for this. I think we're just scratching the surface of an inquiry and that is fascinating and complex, and I hope we can continue this dialogue beyond the conference in Peru, because there's so much for us to get better at and to learn from each other about this. So I like to see this as a kickoff of an ongoing process where we can help you refine your thinking, making it more relevant to all of us without losing sight that ultimately the primary target is the private sector. So thanks a lot, much appreciated.
Okay, and the final word I will leave to Jairo's comment because I like it. How do we convince and engage the human being behind the corporate position? I love that, and I think effective processes do that, and I hope we'll be doing a lot of that in the Amazon in May. But with that, thank you so much for all of your comments. We're going to take them away. I have calls with some of the people. I've had calls with some of the people on this call, Accountability Framework, for example. I've got calls coming up with people like Lloyd, in contact with ProForest.